Okay, so we have to now obviously come to action plans, and the biggest one has to be on caring for the vulnerable. Vulnerability has a definition. There is a quantitative metric which depends on, gender, socioeconomic status, income, the housing you have, and so on, and education, and so on and so forth. We call on all countries and communities to protect the most vulnerable people from the impacts of extreme heat, reduce extreme heat risk, and build their resilience. These are words we use very commonly, risk, vulnerability, resilience, but they need a metric so that you can actually track. When you say build their resilience, are you sure your actions are building their resilience? So you need to track them, right? So that's always important. Monitoring, verifying, reporting always matters. What are the main points? Adopt evidence-based policies, regulations, and multidimensional risk assessments and community-driven actions to protect the most vulnerable. So what is risk? IPCC defines it as the multiplication of hazard, which is the extreme heat in this case, vulnerability, which I already mentioned, exposure, which depends on population density, infrastructure, access to hospitals and other things, and now there is also response. So if country has a good disaster response, extreme heat response, then obviously that reduces your risk as well, right? Keep that in mind. Enhance social protection schemes to integrate specific measures that help address the risk of extreme heat. Establish and bolster heat early warning systems. This is my favorite one because a lot of the climate scientists who keep talking about how bad climate impacts are, we all have to worry about spending more time on producing early warnings than to keep telling people that things will only get worse. Because if 23-24 was really bad and we say we must prepare, then we have to give information on when this may happen again and in your neighborhood how it may look like, because no weather event really repeats itself exactly the same way. So how do you find the resources to actually prepare at local scales? That needs these kind of early warnings. That is our main job, and not to keep scaring people. So I'm just kind of complaining about that. So strengthening capacities of national meteorological and hydrological services would be critical. I've covered this topic elsewhere also. You can look up. Increase equitable access to and scale up low carbon cooling. Invest in the triple strategy of passive cooling, improved energy efficiency, and phase out climate warming gases used in cooling equipment in line with the global cooling pledge at COP28. Okay, so you can read the details here on how to do these in terms of passive cooling, energy efficiency, and phasing out of climate warming gases used in cooling equipment. There is some technology transfer and so on needed. There is already, Montreal Protocol focused on CFCs, then Kigali Amendment is focusing on other refrigerants and replacing them. So developing countries like India get, I think, out to 2035 to replace their cooling refrigerants and so on. But there are many options already available, organic ones and not non-greenhouse gas ones, and so on and so forth. Call to action on extreme heat then. This is the same that we are talking about in terms of caring for the vulnerable. Strengthen health systems and operationalize heat health action plan to prepare healthcare professionals to diagnose and treat heat-related conditions and provide quality care during acute emergencies. So even if you have very good early warnings, how to translate them into such specific actions on heat health action plan is not easy. You need extension agents and so on. Social science, so all the impacts and actions are social science, that they are not so much STEM, so social science is very critical. Develop and implement targeted public education campaigns. Awareness always helps. In India, for example, vulnerability is greatly reduced when women have education of even 5th grade because they respond better to early warnings. Develop and expand international, regional, and national financing mechanisms to support early response to heat waves with a focus on ensuring that resources reach the local level at the right scale and at the right time, which again depends on early warnings. right? It's crisis management in many ways, but can you then use that to build resilience as well, to seek? So I have this under adaptation course on my channel where we look at how international aid can often conflate development projects with adaptation plans and heat wave action plans and so on. So it's always important to make sure that everything is getting addressed. Invest in preparedness for early locally led humanitarian response to severe heat waves. So these are kind of extension agencies, NGOs, private sectors and so on playing a role. Improve standardized surveillance and reporting of heat related morbidity, mortality and injuries. This is very important because attribution and further improving resilience and protecting the vulnerable depends on doing this properly. So heat-related impacts are significantly underreported in all at-risk populations worldwide. Excuse me. Okay, so protect workers. We call on all countries to protect all workers in all sectors through appropriate occupational safety and health measures based on a rights-based approach. Implement urgent measures to protect the health and lives of all workers in all sectors and in all regions of the world from the risk of extreme heat through a rights-based approach. Okay, so these things should be a basic right, that you are protected against heat, extreme heat and so on, right? And urgently review the laws and regulations on occupational safety and health to integrate provisions for extreme heat, including the right to refuse and additional protections for vulnerable workers, including pregnant workers and those with disabilities and those with pre-existing health conditions. This is not easy when you have outsourced business. China is producing a lot of things, India wants to produce a lot of things for the rich world, and obviously there is a lot of informal work settings where such protections are not easily implemented or implementable, and policies, governance issues exist and so on. Tailored strategies for different sectors and both indoor and outdoor workers should be developed and implemented. Again, this comes to very effective governance, policies, implementation, and also enforcement. A lot of rules may exist in the book, but unless they are enforced, it's not going to work. So tailored strategies that are practical and low cost should be made available for informal settings, so where workers have to be protected, and micro, small and medium sized enterprises, what are often referred to as MSMEs in acronyms. Improved surveillance and reporting mechanisms for morbidity and mortality are needed regarding heat stress in the workplace. So things like ESG, environmental, societal and governance requirements, compliance requirements, include collecting such data. And of course there is DEI, diversity, equity and inclusion, which is indirectly related to the same thing as well, in terms of employing people who need employment and are not part of the mainstream, ethnic minorities, religious minorities, gender, etc. And inclusiveness has to be part of the overall protecting of workers, right? So boost resilience of economies and societies using data and science. So heat action and cooling plans, develop and implement comprehensive risk-informed heat action plans and cooling plans in all countries and all sectors. Stress test the heat resilience of current policies, targets, legal and regulatory frameworks and operational practices and protocols. These are very true motherhood statements. How to actually make them happen is always important. Science and data. Ensure standardized reporting of extreme heat risk and impact data to better manage the overall risks. Leverage the innovation, technology and diversity of the private sector to manage extreme heat risks. Build resilience of the built environment and critical sectors to extreme heat. We already talked about it a bit. So here, develop short and long-term measures to reduce extreme heat risks and strengthen heat resilience to reduce societal and environmental vulnerabilities, including critical infrastructure not least energy, transport, agriculture, water, health, and education system. So all of them have to be included. Appoint champions or create a dedicated government department or office that has a cross-sectoral heat resilience mandate. This is tricky and important because many times ministries work in silos. So whether it's adaptation, mitigation, or specific extreme heat action plan, there are always a need for these cross-sectoral communication, sharing of finances, information, personnel, and tools, and so on and so forth, right? So Ministry of Environment, Forestry, Climate Change, Finance, Buildings, Infrastructure, Energy, they all have to kind of work together to make sure that the last mile protection of the vulnerable doesn't fail because of communication across ministries. Okay, so limit temperature rise to 1.5 degrees C. Yeah, maybe I should just read this off as well. As I said, 1.5 degrees C is not scientific, but nonetheless, having any target to aim for 1.5 degrees C by 2100 with a 67% probability. There is somebody standing here and doing some idling, but I can't do much about it. Hopefully the sound is okay. Every fraction of a degree warming matters, but local, hyperlocal information of the impact of global 1.5 degrees C or exceedance is very critical. By early 2025, under the Paris Agreement, every country must submit a new nationally determined contribution that is 1.5 degrees C aligned and economy-wide, providing absolute emissions reduction targets for 2030 and 2035, covering all greenhouse gases and all sectors. So countries are revising NDCs already, and monitoring, reporting, and evaluation will become critical again. Turbocharge measures to phase out fossil fuels. Easier said than done, but many countries, including China, India, and so on, are implementing renewables for their own energy security and economic development. Take urgent measures to cut super pollutants or short-lived climate pollutants, short-lived as they say in the US, emanating especially from the cooling sector. Prevent dumping of new inefficient equipment that uses obsolete refrigerants. Finally, finance is critical to raise ambitions on mitigation and enhance adaptation measure. This is very important. As I mentioned, these have to be mainstreamed into budgeting and fiscal policies, and it's not always easy for developing countries. Key focus area of COP29 will be on finance, with countries expected to agree on a new collective quantified goal, NCQG, collective quantified goal, to succeed the US 100 billion climate finance goal. We need an outcome that builds trust and confidence, catalyzes the trillions of dollars needed, and generates momentum for reform of the international financial architecture. I'll come back and close out on strengthening global action on extreme heat, some resources provided here. That'll be a short one, but I want to leave it as a separate podcast. Okay, so let's come back and close it out.